Hello, everyone, and welcome to another interview episode of What's New in Cloud FinOps with myself, Frank Contrepois, and my good friend
Stephen Old. Great to hear you, Frank.
Go. Hello, and today, so it's interview, so we have someone there, someone who knows a lot about SaaS and FinOps. So guess what we're going to talk about? The hint is in the name. So we have with us Rich Gibbons, and tell us who you are and why you're involved in this strange thing that no university course brings you to.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, guys. So thanks for having me. I'm Rich Gibbons. I have been in the world of software licensing for over 20 years. I was about 4 when I started. Still young. And predominantly my background has been Microsoft. But over the years, you pick up other bits. And then about 10 years ago, I moved more into the asset management world. So I was a reseller for over a decade, saw the birth of cloud. And I remember our sales teams trying to sell an Azure, which was interesting. And then, the rise of SaaS, so Microsoft 365, Adobe Creative Cloud, etc. From reseller into the world of asset management, I was at the ITAM Review, now ITAM Forum, for almost 8 years. Lots of training, conferences, working with end users, understanding their problems. And SaaS has been a problem ever since day one. It's still a problem. And it's one of those things where you think, surely it's sorted itself out by now, but it definitely hasn't. So SaaS, working with that as part of the ITAM Review, and then now at Syniega, trying to bring it all together, ITAM, SaaS, FinOps. So SaaS, one way or another, has been part of my life for a long time, whether I wanted it to be or not. And we're kind of now we're here.
And so you were part of the FinOps for SaaS working group, right?
I was, yeah. So we'd got quite a good crew together. There were some FinOps people, some ITAM people, and we had some very interesting discussions.
Only to us, not to anyone else that wasn't on those calls.
Yeah, I guess whenever I say interesting, there's an asterisk next to it. But yeah, very interesting. And still, some of the conversations still being had. Frank and I were on a foundation call earlier this week, I think, where some of those questions came back up. And the main one is, what is SaaS?
Exactly.
That is still tripping people up. But yeah, the white paper that we wrote as part of that group, I think, is a great starting point. But SaaS is such a broad area, that you come into it, and then very quickly there are several different types of SaaS, and is it this, is it that, and it's one of those areas that it either gets lumped into ITAM or it gets lumped into FinOps, but really it's its own area, needs some real work. So it's very interesting what the foundation are doing. I think FinOps for SaaS is a great idea, and for me, the starting point really is the difference between SaaS for ITAM professionals and SaaS for FinOps professionals, because they are two different things, and that is a...
Explain.
Yeah, that's exactly. He is just creating his own questions. Well done, you. Well done, Rich.
We'll just go on mute.
We continue.
Just leave me to it. So if you talk to an ITAM professional, software licensing professional, about SaaS, that they will talk about things like Adobe Creative Cloud, Microsoft 365, Salesforce, anything that's kind of user based. So that has been around for, I mean, I think Salesforce technically was like 2000. I think that they did their first SaaS, but really Adobe are probably credited with making it mainstream when they just went, no, all of our stuff that you've been buying as a license that you install on premises, it's all cloud-based now. Creative Cloud, it's a subscription. And they were very, very kind of hardcore about it. Customers weren't happy.
Yeah, but I wasn't happy.
But because Adobe had such, there aren't really many alternatives to Adobe. They kind of strong-armed everyone into going that way. And then once they'd done it, Microsoft introduced, BPOS, Office 365, etc. So that's what ITAM people think of when they think about SaaS. It's per user, it's subscription-based. Typically, it will be an annual subscription, maybe monthly if you're feeling a bit crazy. If you talk to a FinOps person about SaaS, that is generally Databricks, Snowflake, New Relic, all kind of consumption-based products that are considered SaaS because they're a layer above the cloud. They sit on the cloud, so they can't be considered cloud. So that tends to be what they mean by SaaS. One of the first things that we had to cover on the working group, and we came to an agreement. I don't know that we came to an answer. They can be two different things.
Yes.
And was really, you've got license-based SaaS and you've got consumption-based SaaS. And that was kind of where we drew the divide. What complicates matters now is more and more software publishers are blurring the lines. So you buy Salesforce, which is a user license, but it comes with some consumption elements or some consumption add-ons. Microsoft 365 Copilot, you buy that, it's a per user license, but then with Copilot Studio, there are certain things you can do with your user license that are charged through a consumption metric.
Yeah.
And then it becomes much more difficult to draw a line between them.
There are lots of different software vendors out there. Why do people specialize? Why do people need to specialize into their software?
That is a great question. I think really it's because software licensing is so complex that to really get into it, get to grips with it, and be happy that you're covering all the bases, you end up. You've only got the capacity for one, really, and then you can do others, to some degree, but never. You always have your kind of first love, as it were. And originally, I started off with Veritas, Backup Exec version 8, I think it was, and that that went so far, but it was relatively straightforward back then. So then I moved to Microsoft. And I think because there are so many, differences and things which are the same terms that mean different things to different publishers, I think to truly be, an expert, as it were, and I don't think you can really call yourself that, but you end up having to specialise because they move so quickly, they make so many changes that it was never a conscious decision, but after a while you realise, I'm a Microsoft person now, or I'm an IBM person. It's kind of happens to you more than anything, I think.
And there's a huge amount of different types of license. If you look at Microsoft, we have Splar. Did you say Bebop or something?
So BPOS was the original. That was the Business Productivity Online Services. That was the first version of Office 365, which then kind of became.
All of this reminds me the fact that it all comes, the complexity of pricing more I don't know, it looks like it comes from the fact that not cloud vendors, in this case software vendors, have lots of power because technical people made the decision that they're going to use something, and then they drop they leave the problem of the licensing, probably, I don't know, if to someone else. Because I find it incredible that getting more and more complex, the complexity of licenses is absolutely staggering. And how do you manage? So everyone tells you need to make your product simpler. But then you have this kind of thing when you have company which just specialize in Microsoft licensing or Oracle licensing. So it's not simple. It's never been simple, and still it works as a commercial.
Yeah, and I think if I'm, to some degree, I think the complexity, at least initially, was unintentional. And it started off, you make a product that does this thing in this way, and then a large international, oil company or a bank says, we would buy it, but we would like it to do this, or we want to buy it in this way. So you go, oh, well, okay, then you can do that. Then over time, that becomes part of the offering. Someone else wants to do it in a slightly different way. And it's really, a lot of it is kind of tech debt. It's some of Microsoft's products, the licensing is 20 odd years old. So over time, you keep it because this customer needs it, that customer needs it. But yeah, you're just building layer upon layer of complexity. And even when you start fresh, which Microsoft have done a couple of times, and you start again, you end up building in the same inefficiencies, the same complexities, because those same customers still want their same ways of working. So it's very difficult, and some of it is absolutely intentional. Some of it is through poor management. Some of it is accidental. Then you end up with a kind of an unholy mess, which we all have the pleasure of trying to fix.
You're muted if you're talking.
I'm having a nightmare today. So the other thing that jumped out, there's two bits. I kind of want to ask a question around all that complexity in previous licensing. Has that transferred to SaaS? But before I ask that, I just want to make a comment that, and this comes from a FinOps head versus an ITAM head, right? And to exactly to your point, you said that you could manage your SaaS user licenses monthly if you're mad. But to me as a FinOps person, of course I'd do it monthly. I'd want some flex. Like I might do some annually, but because I'm just imagining, because I used to manage 365, my 365 users in a big company like my previous company, 113,000 people, went up and down like yo-yos, and and it's certainly a large company at risk. My ability to be able to cut costs quickly was greater than my ability or my desire to keep a standard amount. And I think that's kind of part of the mindset as well, right? We are so used to up and down consumption and managing that. And I know we have RIs and savings plans, etc. But the idea of it all being fixed seems scary to me. Being deadly honest, it feels like, well, what if I get it wrong? What happens? Yeah. So how is that different in the SaaS world?
So that's a great point, and I think that shows why SaaS really does sit in the middle. Because ITAM, software licensing, history is 3-year, 5-year, 7-year agreements. You buy it, you lock it in. Cloud is the exact opposite, like you say, really, really granular, and SaaS goes somewhere in the middle. So it started off very similar in that you were just buying the same products. You couldn't, you didn't own them anymore. They were non-perpetual, but you still bought them on an annual agreement. Typically, you would buy them on a 3-year agreement. You get your price fix. So it still had that same model of understand how many users you've got, predict your future usage, lock a number in, and then, sit with that number for the next year or 3 years. Because SaaS as a model, it does make it easier to understand usage. Then the ability to change your SaaS on a more regular basis is something that people want as an end user, but typically the SaaS vendors will charge you for that. So, Microsoft on the CSP program, if you want to have the monthly flexibility, it's about 20% more for that product to have the flexibility.
Yeah.
Because those publishers, their model, they want to have as much money in the bank as possible. They want to be able to predict it, for shareholders, etc. So the idea of maybe losing thousands of users next month, it doesn't sit well with them. So SaaS is very much in the middle.
So back in the day, so here's another area I see as being different that I'd be really interested in an ITAM person's view on, right? If we have a negotiated agreement for a discount, let's call it, because I've obviously got to be careful with the terms we use, but we all know the ones I'm talking about, listeners, with your cloud vendor, and you go over it, you just carry on getting that discount on the additional piece, but you get charged that amount, right? It's fixed. It's not fixed. You're still variable throughout. If you go under, you have to pay for it at the end. Okay. I imagine that if you go under in ITAM, you've already paid for it, so it doesn't really matter. You don't get anything back. What happens and when about overages, and like how has that bit worked out? Because that bit feels quite different to me. Do they just charge you for what you use? Like, how does that bit work?
There are a few different models. Some of it will be you can, you've bought 5,000, you can't use a 5,000 and first license without placing an order. Right. Microsoft have got a concept of reservations, so you can go into the portal, you reserve them, you get access to them in brackets, in quote marks instantly, and then you pay for them at your later true update. Other vendors, you need to order before you can use.
Yeah.
Some of them moving more towards the model of, okay, the important thing is that you can use the software and we'll bill you, at the end of the month or the end of the quarter, and this is where ITAM contracts are really important in software licensing. Contracts probably not as much of a thing in the cloud worlds, but SaaS, there's lots of things hidden in there. The contract will tell you, maybe you pay a 50% premium for any users over your agreed number. Maybe, there's all kinds of possibilities.
It's driving behaviors, right, by the sounds of things. Like, okay, you should overcommit because you don't want this, right? It feels like it's driving those kind of behaviors to me. Yeah.
And there is, if you have a tiering, if you go above a tiering, or if you start getting discount or not discount by that one user, or there are tons of things in there too. Yeah, but it's interesting also. I think it's also related. You said the importance of contract in SaaS and why it is less relevant, I would say, in cloud is also because in cloud you have less players. You have tens of thousands of SaaS vendors. You have, even if you count everything you can count under the sun, you have 100 cloud vendors. If you really, really go wide, with 5 or 6 owning 80% of the market. So I think that's the reason why the contract is much more dedicated or important.
Going back to your point, Rich, about the FinOps person's view of SaaS often being the consumption based, the stuff that's directly aligned to cloud, and maybe them getting their heads around the 365 and stuff like this. And this isn't me saying that FinOps people aren't clever enough or whatever. But the scale of, to Frank's point, the scale of different SaaS applications in an organization, that is truly, like, it can be ginormous. I can't even think, we're a small, right? Jaeger. I'm probably using, I don't want to say because I'll probably get in trouble with you, but I'm using a lot. But yeah, I mean, that's a very different problem. It's not often like in the cloud, we have one big, or maybe 2 or 3 big spends.
Yep.
It's going to be death by 1,000 cuts on the SaaS side, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. there are so many vendors and so many products that are all quite similar in many regards. And SaaS, the big thing that SaaS did was break the procurement model. So before, it was all centrally purchased. You had to ask someone, can I have this? It went through the process. 7 months later, they said yes. You'd forgotten why you'd ever asked for it. With SaaS, the ability for individual users or business units to just say, right, I know as a company we use product X, but I don't really like it. I'm going to buy this other one. I'll put it on my company credit card. I'll pay for it personally, whatever. That, most organizations were completely unprepared for that. And by the time they realized what was happening, dozens, if not hundreds, of SaaS apps were in use. And, it's not uncommon. I know, with one customer, they had 37 different PDF apps. And, some of them were free, some of them were paid for, some of them were paid by the company, some were individual. And there's a few things there. Obviously, there's wasted spend. There's, from a user training perspective, if I'm working with you, Steve, and you use this product, I have to learn how to use it. Then I'm working with Frank and you use a different product. There's a cost to that. And also from a security angle, you've got 37 different portals, different pieces of software with different attack vectors. The proliferation and the kind of the sprawl of SaaS is huge, and even in organizations where they've got something of a handle on it, it still ends up being much bigger than it would be pre-SaaS.
It's very interesting because it reminds me, we think about cloud and we say, in my case, I say that cloud came from kind of shadow IT because no CFO in their right mind would buy cloud because you cannot understand or forecast really in an accurate way. And so it came from because it was really useful. It was a step change on procurement, even compared to virtualization. So people were starting using it, as you say, using their own cards, etc. But that is still the people that can buy cloud and use it are still a limited amount of very technical people. On the other side, in SaaS, you just need a browser, which effectively makes it everyone has access to SaaS. So as I wanted to make that observation, and it's not even a question, but yeah, the other thing I wanted to highlight before we get through, I was listening recently to an SAP, the CEO of SAP, an interview with that guy, really brilliant person, and he was talking about that from their perspective, internally in SAP and for their customers, the biggest positive for the SaaS, moving to SaaS, is you don't have to do migrations to next versions again.
Right.
And it is exclusively about you're always getting the latest version. It's backed, it's updated, and the other side, it's true. I remember my project there. So that's a benefit of SaaS, which maybe we don't talk enough. It's if you've never been into a migration, an upgrade project for massive software, it's hell. And usually in 3 years' time.
Absolutely. And I think, you see, that's an interesting one because I completely agree. Users, when companies used to have to migrate from, Exchange 2003 to 2007 to 2010 to 2008, having to do that, there's a lot of savings there. On the other side, one of the problems with SaaS is that they just update it and change it whenever they feel like. And Microsoft have recently, you used to go to office.com, you had your Office 365 apps, had your little waffle tile where you could see all your apps. They've completely changed it now. So from a user perspective, when you do the same thing you've been doing for years, it's a different URL, it looks different, your apps are in a different place. And across an organization of 80,000 people, that can slow you down. Or if they decide we don't want to make this feature anymore, in the old world, if as long as you hung on to your licenses, that you still had that feature and they still had to make it work. But now they just, no, we don't like that anymore. Sorry.
Yeah.
And sometimes that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes users and businesses need to be told, stop using this thing that was invented in 1993 and use this much better thing that we've got. But SaaS, it's kind of, it gives with one hand and takes with the other in that regard.
Yeah, well, it's always a balancing act.
You said something earlier which I've never once heard a FinOps person say regarding to FinOps specifically. You said lots of different SaaS vendors with lots of different attack vectors. What do you mean by that?
So just in terms of ways that people can get, bad actors can get into your business.
Right.
So, most of the SaaS applications are built on various pieces of open source software, for example. And if from a software perspective, if you can say, right, we use this product, it's built on, its bill of materials includes these things. So we need, if there's an exploit in this Apache library, for example, we know we've got that, we need to patch it or we need to do something. But when you've got these hundreds of different SaaS applications that are installed on your machines or have access into your corporate network, you can't know all the different things which are potentially exploited or being hacked, etc. So it leaves you vulnerable from that perspective.
And in the FinOps world, we don't worry about that because the security of the cloud is the security team's problem.
Correct.
But in SaaS, again, the amount of places and stuff, the ITAM teams and potentially the FinOps teams, if they're moving into that space, suddenly have a whole different realm to consider.
I think it is a problem from not directly for FinOps, but the fact of using multi-cloud or using lots of different things or extending lots of tools, because every time you have a new tool, a new dashboard, it's going to have to access your S3 bucket. And if one of these tools, that's roughly what Rich is saying, is one of these tools all of a sudden get a vulnerability that allows them for access to the S3 bucket to see your password.
Yeah.
And if you have 20, you're never going to be able to keep track of that. So maybe proliferation or amount of tools doing the same thing or should be something that at the FinOps we keep track of. We say it's the functionality. How many tools do we use? 5. Isn't that too many? Possibly. Or is there a reason, or can we control 5? Because I think that was one of the results of the data of the FinOps Foundation research is people use 3 tools just to do FinOps.
Yeah, 4.2 tools.
Yeah, 4.2 tools, and that just for FinOps. And then you have the Kubernetes control, and that's what I think Rich was talking about. Is if there is a bug in one of them, it's very hard to trace.
Yeah. But often, like I said, not by the FinOps team, right? And that's the reality of it. Like it's and that's the thing that we're not used to dealing with. I guess my final point, because I've got loads of questions, but just so you're not here all day. What's the data like? Like the people who listen to this are all FinOps people, been doing FinOps for years. They know FinOps data inside out. You're talking about thousands of different vendors. Is there any similarity? How do I get it? Can I get it automated? Is it good quality? Like, what's my data situation?
I mean, the classic software answer is it depends. And it massively applies to that. Microsoft, if you want Microsoft 365 data, the Microsoft 365 portal is pretty good. You can see licenses, you can see usage, you can see it broken down by different products, but only for the products that they want to show it to you for. So you can see it, for Teams, for Exchange. But if you want it for projects or for Visio, that's different. What do you mean that's different? What does that mean? Well, so the reports look different. They're in a different place.
Oh, right, okay.
If you buy, the interesting one is if you buy your Microsoft 365 through an MCA agreement, then you can get your data as focus data. But if you buy it on any other type of agreement, you can't. So, and there are reasons, that Microsoft want more people on an MCA agreement. So they're almost using the focus data as a carrot in that respect. Adobe, they have portals. They used to give more in-depth usage insights, and then at some point decided not to do that anymore. So that can be a struggle. And then, other vendors, it will be, you can just see this is how many users you've bought. And then it's up to you to work out who's using them. Even though obviously the vendor, at the other end, they can see who's using what. And it does, for ITAM people, there's a kind of a power imbalance where, historically, the company has had control of the data of who is doing what, who is accessing things, whereas now it's the other way around. The SaaS vendor can come to you and say, right, you bought X, you've been using Y, this is the difference, here's the bill, without any ability to look into why that might be different.
You can't audit your own usage.
So data is uneven, I think, and even if they all give you the data you need, it's all in a different portal. So if you've got 300 SaaS vendors, that's probably 300 different portals, and even if the data was all perfect and exactly what you needed, it would be in different formats. You'd have to download it. So there's a lot of work to be done in that world. And I think the big question:
are there any portals or anything, or any companies that help you, just that kind of handle this problem, and you can get it all from one place? Does anything like that exist?
So some of the tools in the ITAM and SaaS world, will automate the going to the portals and getting data. You can pull it down by APIs in some cases, but even then, the data isn't uniform. So some publishers will call it users, some will call it licensees, some will do it based on monthly access, some will be weekly. So even then, and the tools, the SaaS management tool space is quite big. I think the FinOps tool space is very similar to it. We were talking about this at FinOps X. It's kind of the SaaS market exploded. There were lots of them. Then they started to be acquired. ServiceNow, Flexera, USU, and others. They've all acquired SaaS companies. And I think the market is starting to shrink a little bit now. We're seeing certain tools which are market leading. There are others as well, but there's still a lot of work to do. And even when you have a tool, you still need to have the people bit, the processes. Lots of it will be purchased, maybe through personal accounts that people are then expensing. So how does your corporate tool find that? So there's lots of things like that. So the FinOps for SaaS and trying to get SaaS vendors to work with the focus standard is definitely admirable. I wonder, like Frank said, you've only got a few cloud providers, so kind of it's maybe an easier job. There are fewer cats to herd. And equally, once one of them does it, then it quickly you think, oh, well, they've done it. Why haven't you? But even if you get, a handful of SaaS vendors, there are still hundreds and hundreds that aren't playing ball. So it will be interesting. I think the question will be whether there's anything in it for the SaaS vendors.
Yeah,
that will be the big thing.
I'm going to go back to see things from the FinOps practitioner and the data. I really like the question about the data, and I think it is something that there is a problem in the data that we are getting from cloud and also from SaaS is exacerbated, is that quite often the contract data is not in there. So, for example, on an AWS thing, you will have contract data for each reserved instance or each savings plan. It will tell you when it starts, when it stops, what it's applied to. It's very, very clear. So you have contract data for RIs and SPs, but you don't have that for credits. You don't know how many credits, when they started, when they end, when they, all of this kind of stuff. And what you're just telling us is that it's the same there. Even if they present the data back, the contractualization behind is important, because especially in SaaS, contracts are vital, but there is no incentive to provide that information into the billing data. And the interesting thing, what you're saying, which I'm surprised, I have to say, is that quite often the billing data, you need to go into a portal, which is, I want API for I want my data to be easy to get to into a DB, because I want the control. So that is quite interesting. I'm very curious to think, it's going to drive some of my thinking about it. Is this still, are we completely moving to a world where functionality is more important than even control? And it's really cool. It's really interesting. But
I think one of the things, if you're working with clouds, because there is this concept, they have native tooling built in, in Azure and AWS to help you do some of these things. Obviously, in SaaS, kind of every product that you use, every publisher that you work with is sort of standalone almost. The 10, if there are native tools, there are hundreds of them. And then, to what we were saying earlier, this kind of bleeding between user license and consumption license, makes these things more difficult. Where currently, you're working with a SaaS publisher and it's per user. It's some of it might be per device or something, but now there's this element of, right, we've bought this, and typically what they do, every user license gives you X amount of credits or consumption, and then there's a pay-as-you-go overage, and that is catching a lot of people out because it's unlike anything that the ITAM people have seen. And more and more I'm having conversations with FinOps professionals where they're kind of going, look, all of a sudden I've started seeing this product appear in my Azure bill. What is it? As far as I know, this isn't a cloud service. Now, well, no, it's not. It's a Microsoft SaaS product, but there is a consumption element. So all of a sudden they're seeing 100,000 a month for something that they didn't know existed. So it's a lot, and the data there. Some of the data is in the user portal, some of it is in the Azure portal, some of it might be contractual. It's going to keep us all busy for a while. I think
it's like marketplace purchases too. Yeah, marketplace purchases. Yeah, but conscious of time. And probably that we all have a meeting in 3 minutes. Yeah. I want to say thank you very, very much, Rich. That was, by the way, it was completely impromptu. I think Rich got a 5 minutes warning that, hey, you're going to be in the podcast. Luckily, we've got the best expert, or one of the best experts. I'm going to say the best expert on the topic. And so that was a really interesting discussion. Listeners, I really hope you've enjoyed it as much as we did this conversation. And from me then, thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thanks for having me. I hope it was useful. I enjoyed that.